Hey, Sound Engraver here, or Michelle for short. I wanted to talk about Sound Engraver. This is more or less an impromptu video, just talking about myself as an artist, what I hope to do, what I've been doing, what I've learned, and all of that, just to give you some idea what I'm going for with my music, with my electronic music. Now, Sound Engraver was an idea for maybe something temporary because I couldn't think of anything unique or catchy or memorable at the time. I worked real hard trying to find artist names, something that is attractive, that gets people thinking about electronic music or soundscapes and all of that. But for a while, I just couldn't think of anything outside Sound Engraver. And there is some meaning behind those two words put together, which I will talk about later in this video. But for the moment I was thinking, or really it wasn't a moment, it was probably a year of just wrestling with an artist name and trying to think of an artist name that really matched with the kind of sounds, the kind of music I wanted to produce in the future. And so I couldn't think of anything. So that was our just a temporary idea. Okay, Sound Engraver, fine. I'll put it actually on business cards and different things like that. And I remember, I think it was my dad who was the first one who reacted to that name. He saw my Twitter name, Sound Engraver. He kind of pronounced it. He couldn't see the words at first because of that Twitter name being one word. And then when he sounded it out, he kind of lit up. It was like, oh, that sounds that's kind of neat. And that was a really positive reaction to the name Sound Engraver. And he liked the idea. It was instantly attractive. And I thought, oh, okay, that's good feedback. And then I realized it was a pattern. You know, I started hearing it in different ways, like, oh, Sound Engraver. Oh, yeah, that's cool. And I thought, okay, it's sticking. You know, it's memorable, and it's a nice idea. It's an attractive idea. So as I started producing music and selling music under the name Sound Engraver, as I started growing my YouTube channel under the name, as I have been a presence with Twitter, it used to be something else, can't really remember now, I thought, you know, I think Sound Engraver is here to stay. I think that is going to be my artist name. I wanted to have it be an artist name, but also maybe even a business name for composing attractive, eclectic sounds and music for businesses or companies who are interested in catchy electronic music for their product or for their idea. You know, just being open to not just selling original music for the sake of having it to be original music, but also, you know, it's easy to remember as a business name as well. So that's all my reasons for keeping the name. Now, I wasn't too keen on keeping that name at first with the word sound inside the name. And this is actually it could be contradictory to who I am as a person because I love sound. I have a very keen interest in sound and soundscapes. We'll get to that soon. But as a word for an artist name, I wasn't too keen on it because, well, it's kind of a generic word. It has a generic meaning. It has all sorts of meanings. It can be from the sound waves, music, sound design. It could be, you know, something virtuous, something wholesome, you know, sound advice, for instance. We use the word sound for something that is complete and good. So there's all sorts of meanings and implications to that word. But as it started catching on with people, I thought, well, maybe I should just leave it as is. And that's not knocking on, you know, the Seattle band Soundgarden either. So, you know, not a lot of, but all I know is Soundgarden right now. But that as an example of a prestigious band, a well-known band, using the word sound for this idea for their music. And so Sound Engraver gives you an idea. It gives you an impression. In fact, I like that word impression because that's where engraver comes in. The idea of sounds giving you an impression, maybe a kind of signature. Maybe when you hear my music, the more music I compose, you'll hear a kind of signature, a kind of style, a kind of choice. Maybe you'll hear a sound that is distinct and that is really my own sound. The music that you hear, whether it's my single tracks or my albums and music going forward, most of those sounds are modified. Most of those sounds are changed up a bit and manipulated and maybe distorted or stretched, probably not stretched as much. But the idea of taking an instrument and just really going nuts with changing the parameters and the envelope and the shape of the sound. So a lot of the sounds that you hear in my music, those are modified, personally handcrafted by me. So there's that signature, that insignia, if you will, of that kind of sound design, and maybe a little bit more on that later. So sound, even though it's a generic word, it does ultimately express who I am as a person with regards to art, because I love sound. My love of sound did come from my higher education. It started at the University of Washington. Now, while knowing the things that I know now, while I may have taken a different route in pursuing education, I just did that video on should you get a music degree. Knowing what I know, I probably would have taken a different route, but I can't deny the invaluable thing my higher education brought me, and that was that fostering, that development of that love of sound, and that idea to explore sound using experimentation and all those things on acoustic instruments at the time. But while I was composing acoustic music and chamber music and solo music and all of that, I heard the music and I heard the sounds of the electronic artists and the electroacoustic music that the faculty was composing, that my friends who were doctorates at the time, what they were composing, and I was enthralled. I thought, whoa, that's just really cool sounding. I would love to do something like that. I would love to get to that level. Okay, they're doing SuperCollider. I want to learn SuperCollider. And I nearly failed SuperCollider over there, but I remember thinking, well, it's going to be sound somehow. It's going to be electronic music somehow. It's going to be possibly experimental music somehow. That's what the University of Washington did for me there. It really did encourage this curiosity, really whetting my appetite for producing different sounds and soundscapes and having a real love for things like psychoacoustics and how our head and our heads and our brains localize sounds, how sounds are spatialized in our perception of awareness. Things like psychoacoustics with people like John Chowning, the composer who worked with physics and acoustics and all of that. Barry Truax with the computer music of the 70s. Morton Subotnick, of course, at the time. Really dynamic, really dramatic sound events and musical events that I got to hear. Jonathan Harvey, really exploring ambiosonic and not just the stereophonic space that we hear through our headphones or two speakers, but the ambiosonic space, maybe the quadraphonic space where we have two speakers in front, two speakers behind, maybe that 5.1 surround sound system with that sub at the foot there in front of us. And with ambiosonics, really more than 8 channels. I think it's 10 channels or more, but I'm not sure. But speakers in the ceiling in front of us, behind us, to the side of us, maybe a couple subwoofers there, depending on how large the hall is, how powerful the subwoofers are. And so this immersive, visceral experience of sound really started getting the wheels turning and thinking, oh, I really want to do this. I really want to do this. Now, sound for me, we talked about sound engraving, Sound Engraver, where that artist name came from. This is actually particular to me because I actually have a visual, what am I trying to say? a visceral response to the sound that I hear, especially when it's done poetically, when it's composed in a piece of composition, when it's part of the structure. Now, you guys might be familiar with the internet phenomenon that is ASMR. Now, it makes so much sense to me now why this is a popular thing. Because when I was sitting in the concert halls with the ambisonic acoustic space and listening to all these sounds that were processed, especially when they were very attractive sounds, I was a student and I was being objective about my critical thinking. What is this composer trying to convey? But when I was sitting in the middle, in the sweet spot of this giant hall with all these speakers, if the sounds were attractive, like maybe something to do with ice or water or some sort of bells or something, if it was really consonant and really beautiful, I would be falling asleep. I'd be really relaxed and just kind of thinking, I gotta be objective. And I would be falling asleep because the sounds, this is how visceral it is for me. I will feel like I have a scalp massage, or like the sounds are massaging my scalp and the back of my neck and shoulders. Sounds have a very visceral effect on me. Not all the time. And actually the stuff that I compose doesn't have really an effect on me. I don't think it should, actually, because I want to be objective in producing my craft. But being in that ambisonic space, in that giant concert hall, it was just really aesthetically pleasing as a form of art, but also it just felt like there were these sounds raining on my scalp and stuff like that. So when I, like years down the road, when I found out ASMR was a thing, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So I thought it was just me, but apparently it's not. A lot of people actually do get kind of that euphoric sensation with something like sounds. And for me, I'm also a synesthete. I have synesthesia, so I'll see colors for letters and numbers, letters of the alphabet, and also numbers, of course. And so that also pertains to the letters of the musical scale. So I will see colors for anything. A Bach score has colors, a very certain key, maybe D minor has kind of a beautiful deep brown. D major has kind of a golden tint to it with some red, some burgundy. E flat major has dark forest green tones. The higher you go in the register, the higher the frequency, the whiter the color becomes, so brighter, more opaque in the whiteness of that color. So if G sharp, for instance, is played on the piano and it's at the very high register, G sharp to me is lavender, but if it's very high, if it's a very high pitch G sharp, that's going to be a really whitish lavender. If it's one of the lowest G sharps, on the piano, for instance, or maybe a bassoon or a trombone playing it, or some reedy instrument, it's going to be a very, very deep purple. So not only are the sounds that I hear visceral responses and kind of those euphoric sensations, I also see color. And with sound in particular, I see designs. So if I'm in a concert hall with an electronic piece of music playing around me, or even in just the stereophonic space, it's actually a painting, a mental painting, a mental image. I actually see designs. And I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Fantasia, Disney's Fantasia. I do not know what year the first Fantasia was. I'm not talking about the Fantasia 2000. That movie is cool in its own way, but I'm talking about Fantasia where they had just music and images, and some of these images were really weird and absurd. But there were some ideas of playing of a kind of a painting, like a backdrop with, tiny little designs that were supposed to be the higher strings, or, circles that were supposed to be the wind instruments and stuff like that. So it could have just been Disney just giving me this huge impression as a kid. hearing music and seeing designs in my mind. So it's not just a visceral physical response to sound, it's also my synesthesia with color and also seeing designs for certain sounds too. I just recently released a track called Frost, which actually uses glass sounds, and I just have the glass sounds, panning kind of behind your ears and at the side of your ears very quietly. It's they're supposed to be more background and subliminal, but for one of those sounds, I see kind of feathery, silvery images around, like not around my ears physically, but just it's such a deep impression of what those sounds look like. So a little bit of quirks about me. That could be also why I love sound so much. Is it's quite, I'm not a visually artistic person. I don't work in the visual arts, but it has that kind of response. So that's why it's probably why I love electronic music so much, is because it starts, especially when it's attractive electronic music, it's building these worlds for me. And this is this is a side note, this is kind of sidebar. I'm going on a tangent now just because I'm starting to express what I love with sound and electronic music. But electronic music, especially more mainstream, not house, not dance, not EDM, none of that, but things like downtempo or ambient music, or even this genre called uplifting trance. If it's not really trance music or Goa music of the 90s. It's not underground so much anymore. But this uplifting trance is really to just get you happy and kind of the adrenaline going. And it doesn't really make me happy per se, but what that particular genre does for me is build worlds. It has helped for years, this kind of music. All sorts of electronic music has helped me build worlds and ideas and images and scenes for my science fiction. So I also write science fiction. I haven't published anything, but that is part of my life too, where I compose, but I also write science fiction. So that's what electronic music has done for me as well. It has really helped me build worlds and colors and palettes and ideas, and I just love science fiction conceptual art. And so if I put on one of my favorite electronic tracks and then I watch someone's conceptual science fiction art, maybe, the images that you can see online, I'm happy. It's one of my favorite things. I usually look at conceptual art, science fiction conceptual art, before I get into my science fiction writing. Now, all this to say is I'm not going to be composing for ASMR channels, or maybe there's ASMR music out there, maybe it's a thing, I don't know. But that's not what I'm going to do. I do want to compose sounds incorporated in the body of a poetic context and a narrative. Sounds that really generate some dynamic flow and some momentum. I'm really intrigued by that and incorporating that in the music. So sound to me is really important in composing music. Now, I will say that while faculty at the University of Washington and the students there, and also in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, while they worked in electronic music and worked in sound and did these great acoustic and psychoacoustic and ambisonic spaces, I do feel in general, this may have changed over the years, but back when I was there about 8 or 9 years ago, I do feel that they used sound almost exclusively. Like, sound was music. In a sense, yes, you can use sound and only sound in a musical context. But for me, I want to incorporate sound that is used with a rhythmic section, with harmony, with a bass line, with melody, all those elements that go into that kind of traditional music setting. It can be used in a cinematic setting, something dramatic that you would hear on film, maybe in a science fiction action sequence or some world building. I don't do horror. I don't watch horror films, but I can understand how my music would work in horror films because of that kind of atmospheric, those textures, and how music can work in that way. But I'm more of that traditional form with melody, with harmony, with bass, with percussion. And rather than using orchestral instruments, I want to use sounds and instruments that are digital, that are virtual, like MIDI instruments in something like Logic Pro, or things generated in SuperCollider, for instance. I want to create a musical context that we traditionally understand as music. So I hope that gives you some context of what I want to do, how I want to use sounds, how I want to use sounds as impressions, as signatures. And I think that's where Sound Engraver comes from, where it's engraving. Now, for me, viscerally, it's like sounds are engraving in my brain, like they're carving in my brain. I know that sounds weird. This is a quirk, okay? It's just a quirk I have. But it's part of me, and part of my experience as a composer and designing sounds and all that. But even if you don't have that visceral response yourself, I want it to give you an impression. I want it to be a signature of sorts. And so using what I learned in the academics and my love of sound and exploring soundscapes in the form of experimentation, experimental music, for instance, and working with that. Maybe some things on my violin as well with contemporary technique, but also employing traditional technique that Bach is requiring of me. Just all these things put together and integrated together to really compose music that people by and large enjoy. That it doesn't have to be exclusive to the concert hall. It doesn't have to be exclusive to the academic experience, but that it's presentable, it's accessible, it's attractive. See, I want to compose things that are attractive, and so I want to integrate sound in the music space and have the two have a beautiful marriage. Most of my favorite artists, probably all of my favorite artists, really use this kind of exchange between the two, and kind of that relationship between music and sound, and how they really do work together. So hopefully that sheds some light on who I am as an artist, and revealing some of my quirks, maybe some quiddities. And that's really where Sound Engraver has come from. That's where it's here to stay. It's here to stay as just part of my own unique experience as an artist and as a composer. And hopefully you like what is coming ahead. What's coming this year in terms of my single tracks. And yeah, I think it's going to be a really fun experience this year composing music, and I'm really excited for my next release. And with that, I think we'll adjourn. But thanks for listening to this impromptu and a little bit who I am and why I came up with the name Sound Engraver, where that's from. So anyway, thanks for watching. Always be on the lookout for some more sound experimentation every Thursday, and also some more commentary on Tuesdays. So until next time, happy producing the music or the art that you love, and thanks for watching.